Hey guys, my name is Mike and this is my introduction to stop motion animation. In this episode guys, I'm going to be showing you the process for making a stop motion puppet, and you can use that same process to make your own character that you can then put into your own stop motion animation. So today guys, I'll be making this guy. Some of you may recognize him. His name is Siren Head. Now Siren Head is a character created by an artist named Trevor Henderson in 2018. Who's well known for making these cryptid creatures, but none more famous than Siren Head. I've seen some really cool fan art of this guy in recent times and thought it might be fun to include him in some stop motion animation. We're going to start by building the skeletal structure for our puppet using aluminium wire, and once that's done we're going to use some plasticine clay to then build up the features on our character. But before we get started guys, there's a few things I need to mention because we're going to be working with a few tricky materials today. Firstly guys, I do not advise that you follow this process unless you're at least 10 years old. And even at that, if this is your first time, you should definitely be accompanied by an adult. Because today guys, we're going to be working with a lot of wire. And when you're working with wire, you need to work safe. Secondly guys, we're going to be using this stuff here. It's called milliput. And it's a type of putty we're going to be using to bind the wires together later on. Basically how it works guys is you have two different color putties and then you mix equal parts of those two colors together to form one uniform color, which is usually pale yellow. And once it's mixed guys, you have about 45 minutes before it starts to harden, so you do need to move fast. My advice would be to do small pieces at a time, that way you're not going to put yourself under pressure. So it takes about 12 hours before it fully hardens, and it's really important that you don't go at it during this time. Because if you do, you might loosen the wires inside the putty and it won't be able to bind them together properly. But that being said, it's a perfectly safe product to use. It's just a case of using it accurately and responsibly, which is something I'm going to cover during the tutorial anyway. So let's get into it guys.
So the first thing we need guys are a pair of safety goggles, because we can't work with wire without them. The wire we'll be using is aluminium wire, and we'll be using 1mm, 2mm and 3mm aluminium wire. And we'll also be using a 0.5 aluminium wire for doing the character's fingers. We'll be using plasticine to sculpt the character, a palette knife and a paintbrush, but we're only going to be using the handle of the paintbrush, tin foil, masking tape, a big scissors for cutting the wire, and we'll be using this stuff as well guys. It's a type of putty that we're going to use to stick the wires later on. So in order to be able to make your puppet, the first thing you're going to have to do is a symmetrical drawing of your character. And what that means is that the character is exactly the same on both sides. Then with our pencil, we're going to draw a line right up the middle of the character, and this will be the character's spine. And for that we'll be using 3mm wire, because that's the strongest wire and we want something strong to be able to support the character's upper body. So we're just going to cut a length of this using our scissors. And make sure that it's too long guys, because you can always cut a bit off afterwards. Next we're going to draw out where the arms would be. So we draw a circle where the palms of his hands are, and then we draw a line right in the middle of the character's arm. And we're going to do the exact same thing for the character's legs. And afterwards we're going to use them lines as a guide when we're making the frame for our character. So we're going to place that wire back down and we're going to create a loop right where the legs cross over. And to do that guys, it's actually easier to use a brush or some sort of object, and you can wrap the wire around that object and create a better loop. And now we'll do the same thing where the arms cross over. We'll place our brush down and then we'll pull the wire around the brush. So it should look something like this. And don't worry about that extra wire sticking out at the bottom, because we're going to trim that off afterwards. So now we're going to get some 2mm wire and we're going to use that for the arms and the legs. So first we'll do the arms. So using the scissors, we're going to cut off a long length of wire. Then we're going to place it through that loop that we made for the arms. We're going to push it about halfway, and then we're going to wrap that wire around the spine. Then we're going to create a loop using our drawing as a guide. We're going to create a loop going all the way around, and we're going to bring it back up to the top. But we want to make sure that this loop is a little bit longer than the arm, because we're actually going to be twisting this loop now in a minute, and it is going to get a little bit shorter. Then we just wrap the excess wire around the spine, and we're going to do the exact same thing now with the other arm. And just be sure to wrap that excess wire around the same spot as well, right where the original loop was for the arms. So next we're going to straighten out each arm, and then we're going to twist. And we're going to keep twisting until we're left with this loop at the end, which will be for the character's hand. And we'll just repeat that now for the other arm. So when you're finished, it should look something like this. So we're going to repeat the same process now for the character's legs as we did for the arms. We're going to push the wire through the loop till it's about halfway. Then we're going to create a loop for each leg using our drawing as a guide. And we're going to wrap whatever excess around the character's waist. And now, using the scissors, I can cut off that excess wire that was on the spine. Then we're going to straighten out the character's legs, and we're going to twist them just like we did the arms. And we're going to leave that little loop at the end for the character's feet. Next we're going to use some 1mm wire, and we're going to wrap that around our character just to reinforce him and make him even stronger. So just get one big long length, place it around his neck about halfway so it's even on both sides. Then we're going to wrap each side around the spine once or twice. We're going to straighten out his arm, and then we're going to keep wrapping that wire all the way around his arm until we reach the very end. And then just cut whatever excess wire you have using the scissors. And now we'll do the exact same thing with the other arm. And now we're going to repeat that same process with the legs. We're going to cut off a length of wire, place it around halfway, and then start wrapping the wire around each leg. Then we're going to wrap one more wire around the spine of the character. Next we're going to make the character's hands, and we're going to be using 0.5 aluminium wire. You need to use a small wire when we're making the fingers, because it could be tricky trying to move them later on if the wire is too thick. So what I usually do for the fingers is I just cut off a piece of wire, I make a U shape, and then I grab both sides of the U shape and cross them over. And if I give it a little pull, you're going to be left with this finger shape. Then we're going to place that finger shape into the loop on the hand. And once we've decided what length the finger is going to be, then we're going to wrap each of these wires back around each side of the finger shape. So it should look something like this. Then we're just going to wrap that excess wire around where the palm of the hand is going to be. And now I'm going to use that same process, and I'm going to make all the other fingers for the character. A good tip if you're ever making hands is always start with the middle finger, because the middle finger is the longest finger on your hand. Then I do the two fingers at either side of that, because they're both the same length. Then I just do the little finger and finally the thumb. And remember guys, you can always look at your own hand and it will give you a good idea of how long each finger has to be. But that really depends on what type of character you're making. So in the finish, the hands should look something like this. And now I'll do the same thing with the character's feet. Now I normally wouldn't make toes for a character, but because this is Siren Head, I have to include his really long toes that he has on his feet. Like if you're planning on making a character that's going to be wearing shoes, there's no point in making toes because you won't see them. So you could just use that loop at the end of the character's leg and build your shoe around that. But if you are making a character that has toes, just be sure to use the same technique that we used on this character's hands. And just wrap whatever excess wire you have left around the loop. Next we're going to use some milliput, and we're going to use milliput to bind the wires together. And we're also going to use it to create bones for our character, so that he can bend in the right places. So using our drone, I'm going to highlight all the areas where we want our character to bend. So the shoulders, the elbows, the spine, the hips, the knees, the ankles, the wrists, and finally the neck. So these are the areas where we won't be putting any milliput. We will, however, be putting milliput in between those areas. And that's what I'm highlighting here in yellow in the drawing. And this is another good example, guys, of how important it is to do these drawings first before you make the puppet. So one last thing to do now before we apply the milliput. We're going to get one big long piece of 3mm aluminium wire. That's the thickest wire that we were using. We're going to place the wire in the center of the character, about halfway. Then we're going to bend it around. And we're going to wrap this wire around the character a couple of times in the center. So make sure that these wires are facing out the back of the character, and then we're going to twist the wires around each other. And keep doing that till you reach the end. So what we're actually making here is a super thick, super strong wire that's going to hold our character up during the animation. And if you want to reinforce that and make it even stronger, you can just wrap some 1mm aluminium wire around that. It might seem strange adding this piece to the character right now, but later on when we're animating the character, it'll make a lot of sense. So before putting the milliput on, what's a good idea is to bend the arms and the legs in the places where you want the elbows and the knees to be. So if I take this arm here and I bend it a little bit, so now I can kind of see where the elbow is going to be. So I know that I'm not to put any milliput on that area. So I'm going to do the same thing now for the character's arms and legs. See, I'm just going to take that leg and I'm going to bend it exactly where I want the knee to be. So this part is important, guys. This here is the milliput, and when we take it out of the packet, we can see it comes in two different colours. And when these two colours are mixed together, you have about 45 minutes before it starts to go hard. So we're going to cut two equal sizes of each of the colours. And be sure to use something old when you're cutting these. Like I'm just using this old table knife here, and I have this sheet of paper underneath for cutting on. And be sure to wrap up whatever milliput you have left over and put it back in the box. Next we're going to mix these two colours together, and it's important that we mix these really well, guys, because if they're not mixed well, then it might not work. So make sure there's no streaks and that the two colours have combined together to form one uniform colour, which is usually a really pale yellow. So once that's mixed, I'm just going to take a tiny little piece of the Milliput and we're going to start in the chest area. I'm going to place the piece on all that wire that we have crossed over, and with my thumbs I'm just going to push it inside that wire. And using little small pieces at a time, I'm just going to keep adding and keep pushing them in. This way, when the Milliput hardens, all them wires are going to stay locked in and the arms are going to be able to move a lot better. And be sure to put plenty of Milliput around that really thick wire that we have sticking out the back of the character. That's the wire going to be holding our character up later on, so we need that to be really strong. Next we're going to get two equally sized pieces and we're going to use these for the character's upper arm. And you can see there that I'm leaving the gap for the character's shoulder. When it comes to applying the Milliput, the best thing to do is to just place it on the arm, push it down with your thumb, and then just pinch it around the sides. So I'll do the same now for the character's lower arm, and I'm leaving that gap there for the character's elbow. So you could wear gloves doing this if you like. I find that this putty tends to stick to the gloves a lot, which can be kind of annoying. But if you're not wearing gloves, it's really important to have a basin of soapy water and a sponge that you can wash this stuff off your fingers, because it will stick to your fingers as well after a while. And you'll actually find it really difficult to use the putty because it's just constantly sticking to your fingers. So I'm constantly washing my hands throughout this entire process. And now when I'm applying the Milliput to the character, it's so much easier now that my hands are clean. So now I'll apply some Milliput to the character's waist, and that's the area where we had all the wires cross over each other earlier. So this is going to lock all them wires in. Then I'll do the character's upper legs. Now, before we go any further, we should do the hands. So on the palm of the hand, I'm just going to push one small piece of putty down from the top, and I'm going to push one small piece of putty up from the bottom, and them two pieces should meet in the middle and form the palm for the hand. Also, it's going to lock all them wires that we use for the fingers in place. So I'll just do the same now for the other hand. And remember guys, to leave the wrist area free from putty so we can move it later on, just like we highlighted in the drawing earlier. For the fingers then, I just put a tiny piece of putty at the end of each finger. It might not be the most realistic finger, but it's perfectly fine for a stop motion puppet. So then we'll go back and we'll do the lower legs. And be sure to leave the knees and the ankles freed up. So now I'm going to do the same thing for the feet as I did for the hands. I'm going to take a small piece of putty, push it down from the top, and I'm going to take another small piece and push it up from the bottom. And that's going to lock everything in place. And lastly, I'm going to put a small piece of putty at the end of each toe. And that's pretty much it guys. Now, the most important thing when you're using Milliput is that as soon as you're finished applying it, you need to put your character aside and don't touch him for 12 hours. The reason why this is so important guys is because we want to give the Milliput as much time as possible in order for it to harden. If we start moving the character, the wires inside the Milliput might become loose and it will make it really difficult to animate with later on. So this is how it looks after 12 hours. The Milliput has gone rock hard And we can see here when I bend the character's arm, it bends right on the elbow where I want it to. The same with the character's wrist, the character's shoulder, and all the character's fingers too. So one last look at the drawing, and we can see all them areas that we highlighted in red earlier are all the areas that I left free of Milliput. And a good tip is to always have a picture of the character you're making beside you. So here I have a picture of Siren Head open on my iPad, and I can use that as a guide when I'm adding details to my character. So for his actual Siren Head, I'm just going to wrap some of this 1mm aluminium wire around my finger to create this loop. And then I'm going to wrap them 2 wires around the loop, just to roughly create the siren shape. And the wire doesn't have to be too strong here, guys, because it's only going to be holding his head. So once I've decided where I want it to go, I'm just going to wrap the excess wire around the head. And I'll do the exact same thing for the second siren. So one of the things you need to try and do when you're making a stop motion puppet is we need to try and keep this puppet as light as possible. And a good way to do that is to bulk out your character using tinfoil, because tinfoil is a lot lighter than clay. So this chest area of Siren Head seems to be the thickest part of the character. So that's where I'm going to be putting some tinfoil. And you can then wrap that with some strips of masking tape. I'm not going to put it on his arms or legs, because his arms and legs are generally very thin anyway. Next, guys, we're going to be adding the clay. So the first thing we're going to want to do is wipe down the surface. And we're going to be using this multicolour pack of plasticine to build Siren Head, particularly this colour here in the middle. And we're going to make 3 different colour tones using that colour by mixing a lot of white with one and a little bit of black with another, and then keeping the middle tone the same. So we start by mixing the darkest tone, which is this one here. And when mixed, I ended up with this colour here. And be sure, guys, to wash your hands before mixing the lightest tone, because you don't want to be mixing in any other colours. So now I'm taking the darkest tone and I'm going to cover the entire puppet with this colour. But be sure to do this slowly, guys. It's all about applying a small piece of clay at a time and building the character up until the character is completely covered. And you can also use the back of the brush to smooth all those pieces together. And now that he's completely covered, this is how he looks. And don't worry about the back of the character, because it won't really matter too much for this exercise, guys. We're actually only going to see him from the front during the animation. So this wire here sticking out the back of the character, we're going to be using that later on, but it's also handy now as a stand to hold the puppet up while we're adding clay and other details. So we're going to start with the head, and I'm just going to fill in those 2 siren areas, and I'm going to use that dark colour tone that we used on the rest of his body. Then using the back of the brush, I'm just going to smooth all that together, and I'm also going to use the back of the brush to create the shape that I'm looking for. And to do this, I'm just going to keep rolling the brush across the plasticine. Then I'm going to get a small piece of plasticine that I rolled out, and I'm going to place that at the end of the siren. And I'm just going to use the palette knife to cut off any excess, and this should give the character a tidier finish. Next, I'm going to get a small piece of black clay, and I'm going to put that at the end of the siren where I want the mouth to be. I'm going to use a tiny bit of pink to make his gums, and I'm going to place one at the top of his mouth, and I'm going to place one at the bottom, and I'm going to do the same thing with the other siren. For his teeth, I'm just going to flatten down this piece of white clay, and I'm going to use my palette knife to cut little tiny teeth. And I'm going to make sure that I have them all cut before I start putting them on my character. Now these are actually quite small, which makes them really difficult to pick up, especially for me because I have such big hands. But what you could do is, you could use a toothpick and just pick it up like this. And you can use that toothpick when you're applying it to your character. Next, I'm going to put this tiny strip of pink clay over the character's teeth, just to blend them into the gums. And I'll also use the toothpick just to create a little texture. And I'll put one more strip around the end of the mouth, just so it all sinks in. So that's it for the character's mouth, guys. Next we're going to start making his bony body. And we're going to do that by using the lightest colour that we mixed earlier. And we're just going to roll out small shapes like this and slowly build up our character. So we'll place a bit here in the middle of the rib cage, and then we'll start adding each rib. Then I'm going to roll out a longer, thinner piece, and I'm going to start wrapping that around the neck and around the sirens. And I'm going to do the same thing now with his stomach area, but this time I want the lines running downwards, and I'll continue that the whole way across. Now this character has big sharp hip bones, so I'm going to put an extra thick piece of clay here. Then I'm going to wrap a thinner, longer piece all around the hip bones, just to kind of bring it all together. Then using the back of the brush, I'm going to take this small piece of clay and I'm going to try and create this shape here. It's the kind of shape you'd see at the end of a bone. And I'm going to place these on the character in all the different areas where his joints are. So starting with the knees, I'm going to place one at the top and one at the bottom, right where his knees bend. And you can use the back of the brush as well to make sure that you get the shape that you were looking for. And now we'll just add this piece of clay here running from the hip down to the knees to create the bony leg effect. And we're going to do the exact same thing now with the character's ankles. Now, because this particular character has really long toes, I'm actually going to run the bones of his toes from his ankles all the way down. And now I'll just finish off the other leg. So whatever character you guys decide to make, a good tip when you're using clay is always start off with a basic shape, and then you can add the details later. As you see here, guys, all we're doing is rolling out lines of clay. The important thing is how you then apply that to your character. And it always helps if you have a picture of whatever you're making on your work desk too. Whether that's a picture on your iPad or maybe a drawing that you have. So next, guys, we're going to get that original colour that we had, the one that we didn't mix. And we're going to roll out a load of these really thin lines. We're then going to start adding these to the character in different areas, and I'm just going to follow the pattern that the bones have already created on this character. And what we're doing by adding this mid-tone is just giving the character a bit more depth. And it's going to highlight those bone areas even more. So I'm just going to place them randomly all over the character. So with this small piece of the dark clay that I have left, I'm just going to wrap that around the sirens, just to make it look a bit more finished. So next I'm going to give the character some texture, and I'm just going to tap all them bone areas with the back end of the brush. So you can see here I'm creating that bone texture on all the ribs. So texture is always a good thing to experiment with, guys, and you might find something around the house that might be the perfect tool for creating the texture that you want. You can see here the difference it makes just by tapping this character with the end of a brush. Textures will help take that flat look off the character and also make him look a bit more interesting. So I'm just going to continue adding this texture all over the character, anywhere where the bones are. Then using a toothpick, I'm just going to poke holes in all them bones, just to make him look a bit more aged. And that's almost it, guys. We just have one more thing to make, and that's Siren Head's tongue. So I'm going to get a little piece of wire in the shape of a U, similar to the ones we use to make the character's fingers. And I'm going to apply a little bit of purple clay to make the tongue. And I'm going to make 4 different size tongues as well, so I can swap them in between each frame. And I'm going to leave a little bit of wire sticking out at the end of the tongue so I can attach them to the character easily. Then using a toothpick we can create that hollow in each tongue.
So that's going to be it for this episode, guys, and hopefully this tutorial will help you make your own stop motion puppet. But more importantly, guys, it should give you a good understanding of the different materials used in this process. And remember, guys, whatever character you decide to make, it all starts with this symmetrical drawing here. This is going to be your guide. It's where you can plan each move before you make it, but also informs you what size everything needs to be. On the next episode, we're going to be making a short animation using our Siren Head character. And I'm also going to be showing you guys how to make your own stop motion animation that you can then share on mobile platform. Thanks for watching, guys, and as always, stay safe.